Okay, I'll go ahead and get us started. Like you said, my name is Chelsea Davis. I've been a social worker for about 4 years now. My job, I work with high school students who are at risk of dropping out. So I help them overcome whatever barriers they're facing, academic, mental health, homelessness, issues at home, etc. And my ultimate goal is to help each of them graduate. So I work at a high school with about 80 students, and that's what I do. I was involved with Focus at Collin College, Spring Creek campus. Where are you at, Cougars? And then I graduated from UNT in 2013, and I now live in Denton. My husband, Brad, is the pastor of the Denton North Church, and so I work with a lot of the adult ministry there, because it's a small church, and if you're basically able to talk, you're in charge of something. You have some job, so I help with adult ministry there, and so that's what I do. So is there a little bit of feedback, or is it okay? All right, good. Just wave at me if it gets bad. So when Brandon asked me to talk about this at winter camp, it was so funny to me because he talked about this 2 years ago. And I remember it because I ended up crying in the bathroom because I was so depressed about what he had said. No offense to him. But I was like a year into working full time. I had just graduated a year earlier, right? So I had just finished my first year of social work. And I'm not kidding, I was anxious about my work. I was depressed about my work. I missed Focus. I missed ministry. I missed working with people who knew me, and when they asked how I was, they really wanted to know how I was, just little things like that. And I had actually that weekend, which Mandy Lanciani might think this is kind of funny, but that weekend I sat down with her. She may not remember, but I was like, hey, what do you think about me, coming back and doing the Focus apprenticeship? And she was basically like, no. And she told me, she's like, I think that you need to try working. The apprenticeship is always going to be here, but I think you need to give work a bigger shot, I guess. Really try it out. And so that kind of kicked off this journey for me. And a few months after that, God kind of provided a position for me that I ended up really loving. So that was kind of a God deal. But that kicked off this journey for me of really thinking about these things. Why do I even have a job? How is my work, ministry? Have I missed out on being a minister? I remember feeling like I had missed the boat on ministry because I didn't do the apprenticeship. I chose to go work instead. And I was like, well, I've taken my name off the list as far as people who are advancing the kingdom, because here I am at a job for 40 hours a week. I knew I was making an impact on the students that I worked with, but I didn't know what the point was of the time I spent working on paperwork or analyzing data. That's a big part of social work, any of you future social workers out there. So I was like, what's the point of all that? I'm just sitting at a desk. How am I doing anything good when I do that? And really thinking through these things. And I wanted to know how I could be content at my job. I wanted to love my work the way I'd loved doing ministry. I was like, I want to be excited about what I'm doing the same way I was for the past 4 years. And that's been kind of something God's been teaching me a lot about and giving me a lot of insight into. And I do want to make a point. When Ronnie was talking last night and kept saying, it's not because I'm good, it's because God's good. I wrote that down to say, I am not good at this. I'm not good at my job, really. I'm kind of probably average. But God has been so good to me in showing me how to love my work and in showing me the ways that He is working in my workplace. And these are awesome. So anyways, that was just a side note. But all those questions I was asking are questions you're probably going to be asking within the next few years. As you graduate and go into your workplace, I'm sure many of you will struggle through the same things. And we really want to help you begin thinking through these and thinking through what makes your job spiritual, what makes your job sacred, and how to approach those things. So we wanted to start. I want to talk about our sources really quick. So there's a packet for you guys, and most of our sources are listed at the back. But I really do want to give credit to Brandon Worsham because we basically copied his exact talk. And I'm going to try my best to make his points and then just tell my own stories. So I'm not as smart as he is, so I maybe won't make his points all that well. But we really got a lot of our information from the presentation that he had put together a few years ago. So we're going to start with a little true or false, and then you guys are going to talk about it amongst yourselves, okay? So true or false? God cares just as much about secular work as he does about ministry work. So I want you to talk about that with the person next to you. Go. Okay. Hello, simmer down, children. Okay, so the truth is that there is no spiritual hierarchy to the work that we can do. There are certainly areas of work that as Christians we should never do, and I'll talk about that. But God is working everywhere, and he's not only invited us to join him in that work, he's commanded us to join him in the work that he's doing everywhere. And last night they talked about all these different apprenticeship and ministry opportunities, but and those are all awesome. I mean, you obviously have heard from people, those are going to change your life and they're going to be so beneficial. But I don't want any of you to get the idea that if you really want to serve God, you'll go into a vocational ministry, because that's not true. If it was true, where would that leave most of the people sitting in this room? There's not enough spots in the apprenticeship for all of us. And we'll spend most of our lives working, like 100,000 hours is the number that Brandon put down, which I don't know where he got that. Maybe he made it up, but it sounds official. So a lot of time working. And he also wrote, I want to make fun of him for a second. So in his notes from last time, it says, can you imagine a world where everyone worked for a church? What would we eat? Where would we sleep? We would all die. Which, like, maybe down the line is true, but so dramatic. But God is concerned with humans flourishing in all areas. Jesus is Lord over every hour of my week, including the time I'm at work. I often felt like I was wasting 40 hours a week at work, and then I only had like 2 hours a day to do what I really wanted, or to do ministry, or to enjoy my life. And I remember Brad was like, do you realize how lucky you are that you have a job where you get to like sit down and talk to people and you're not like doing manual labor? Like, how are you complaining this much? He's so sweet. I was like, oh my gosh, who am I kidding? These 8 hours a day are still 8 hours a day. God is still Lord over that. God's working where I am. And one of the articles that we sourced on here is called Refocused Vocation. And there's a quote that I wanted to kind of end this little section with. And it says, there is not a square inch in the whole domain of our human existence over which Christ, who is sovereign over all, does not cry, mine. There is not a square inch of my life that Jesus doesn't say, that's mine. You've surrendered to me and I'm Lord over that. Which is sometimes like, oh, intimidating, but also a little bit peaceful, because I know that he's there with me and he's working where I am.
So I'm Kelly Schlitz. Brandon introduced me as being one of the most articulate people on our staff, and I don't know if I deserve that introduction. My real reputation on our staff is the most tearful person, which is kind of in competition with being articulate. So either I'm very articulate and prepared and eloquent, or I'm a bawling mess with like snot coming out of my nose and tears everywhere. So I hope that I'll stay on this end today. I have prepared, and I hope that that is the experience that you guys will get. Otherwise, warning to the first row, because you're in the splash zone. So I've been involved with Focus since I was a freshman at UTD in 2007. I have worked in ministry at our UTD campus, at our Denton campuses, and I'm now at UT Arlington. I'm a maverick. Am I doing it right, guys? I'm not the best maverick. But I've worked part-time in ministry, full-time in ministry. I've worked as a volunteer in ministry. I've been a Corfa, like a lot of you guys are, doing that sort of volunteer work while I was a student. And I've also worked on the administrative side of doing ministry, so I have a lot of experience there. But I also have some past work experience that includes about 3 years working at an insurance agency. And that's the kind of job that when you first think about it, it sounds like a thoroughly secular job. How could I possibly be doing God's work as an office assistant at an insurance agency? I did a lot of bookkeeping, filing, managing a database of client information, running errands. I bought snacks for the kitchen to feed all of the guys in the office. But it was there in that thoroughly secular job that I began to see how God is at work through the apparent banalities of what we do. My job wasn't just about doing paperwork and making sure everybody got paid on time. Because of insurance, our clients could rebuild their homes after a house fire. Sarah King had that experience. Sarah and Hannah's house burned down. And because of insurance, it could be rebuilt. It's not funny, but it is amazing. Praise God that there's an industry out there that works to make things right after personal disasters. And I got to be a part of that. Even though I wasn't the one hammering nails to rebuild the house, I got to manage some paperwork that contributed some way into doing that for people. It was a means of participating in God's redeeming work in the world. But we're going to talk more about that later. Right now, I want to jump into your packet there. Is there anyone who doesn't have a packet? If you don't have a packet, raise your hand. Maybe if you're at the back or you didn't have a seat, Isabel has some, and she'll run around and get you one. And she should have some pins, too, if you didn't come with a pin. So with this packet, I joked around with Chelsea that if anybody misses a point or you're not sure where we are in the packet, just raise your hand. And Chelsea was like, nobody's going to raise their hands to stop you during this talk. I know some of you are out there. I have seen some of you, even in a room with 600 people, raise your hand to ask a question. It's okay. If we get off, stop us. Let us know. If I'm speaking and I get off the point and you're not sure where we are, you can interrupt me. Don't interrupt Chelsea because she'll be very angry at you. Just kidding. So the first item on your packet, there is a definition of work. If we're going to spend a couple hours this morning talking about work, we need to define our terms. So this definition that you have is from Paul Stevens. He wrote a book called Work Matters, and it's in the resources at the back if you're interested. So his definition of work: any purposeful expenditure of energy, whether manual, mental, or both, whether paid or not. Any purposeful expenditure of energy, manual, mental, or both, whether paid or not. So this definition to me is much broader than just our paid employment. It's more than just the jobs that we go to. As we talk about work this morning, we're talking about many other things. We're talking about the unpaid work of raising children or caring for aging parents. We're talking about the work of maintaining a home, the work of learning or education, which most of you are engaged in right now. You don't get paid for that. You're paying someone for that, but it's still work, right? If you're not nodding in agreement, it means you need to work harder. I'm talking about volunteer work. I'm talking about some of our hobbies. The work of creating art. The people who worked on our flags, they put meaningful work into that. And they're not getting paid for that. That's not their paid employment, but it's still meaningful work. And even the work of seeking employment. If you've ever had a long spell where you were trying to find a job, you know that that's work too. Filling out applications and preparing for interviews is work. And so all of those things and a lot of other things I don't have time to mention are going to fall under this definition of work. Now, from a big picture perspective, all of us in this room have incredible freedoms in the work that we choose to do. And that's different from most of human history. Most people, just from the beginning, have had very limited choices in the kind of work that they do. People farmed because they needed food. That was the only option to get food. Women were stay-at-home moms because they were the ones who made milk to nurse babies. They had to if they wanted their children to survive. Young men took up jobs like carpentry or blacksmithing because that's what their fathers did. That was the only path available to them. You know, I can't really imagine a lot of children in the Middle Ages being asked, what do you want to be when you grow up? Or being encouraged to follow your dreams. But now, you guys, all of us in this room, we are the inheritors of a very different society. Things have changed. We live in a society that's powered by trade and technology and commerce. And that allows us to have choices that would have been unthinkable for many, many generations of people. Most of you in this room are middle-class Americans, and you either are or soon will be college graduates. And that means you have more choice in your work than just about anyone else ever in human history. Now, that can be really freeing and exciting, and the world is just full of opportunities for you. But that can also be really overwhelming sometimes, right? So my hope for you is that by the end of this talk, you'll feel a sense of peace about those choices in front of you. Chelsea and I hope to show you that there's not just one right choice out there for you, so you don't have to stress out so much about finding it. There's not one best job for Christians, and all the others are somehow inferior. Like Chelsea said, we want you all to consider doing the Focus apprenticeship, but we don't have room for all of you to do it. One of my roles is as the apprenticeship coordinator, and I do not want to do paperwork for all 600 of you to join our team. But I know there are some of you out there who really need to be on our team, so be praying about it, consider it, talk to your counselors about that. But don't all of you apply at once. It would make my life very difficult. But there are many good choices available to you guys, not just ministry jobs. And if you make a choice right now as a college student or as a recent graduate and it doesn't work out, you still have the option to change your mind. Majors can change. You can go back to school. You can change your job. It's not like you have to choose one thing right now, and this is the only chance you get. So I know that overwhelming breadth of choices can be a big obstacle to finding peace and satisfaction in our work. As Christians, we often face an additional obstacle, an additional barrier to finding meaningful work and finding joy in it. And that is a persistent heresy called Gnosticism. Gnosticism is an early heresy that taught a form of dualism in which there were two worlds, basically. There's the spiritual world, the world of goodness, enlightenment, holiness, the world where God dwells. We might call it heaven. It's a world where maybe people can hope to go after they die and escape the physical world. And Gnosticism teaches the other world is the material world. It's where we all live right now. It's the world made up of physical matter, of bodies, of the earth. And Gnosticism teaches that world is a bad world that we're trying to escape from. There was no room in Gnostic thinking for a Jesus who came fully human and fully God. They split those things apart. It couldn't possibly be combined together. They thought Jesus was either a purely spiritual being who just sort of looked like a human, or maybe he was a man who had attained some high level of spiritual enlightenment. Now, this way of thinking is insidious, and it still influences Christian thought today. It comes up when we suggest that the afterlife is a purely spiritual realm, where we float around as amorphous blobs of spirit without bodies. Maybe you've seen images of people like sitting on clouds, playing harps, and they're angels and don't have anything to do all day. They just sit around. That is the way that this Gnostic heresy still influences us sometimes, and that's a problem. This Gnostic heresy also persists when we suggest that some types of work are better or more holy than others, when we glorify the work that we call ministry over the lay people. Bible study and prayer are just as important, just as spiritual as things like preparing our meals or working in factories or growing food. They're all important and all meaningful. Paul Stevens says this. He said, "The secular sacred split is the most pernicious heresy of our modern age." And that's true in part because of how deeply it has degraded our understanding of work. But Jesus abolished that split when he came as a man with a physical body, and he spent 30 years living a common life We've already talked at this camp about how he did the work of carpentry with his father for a while. And he only spent 3 years in full-time ministry doing what we might call the more spiritual work. In the Gnostic writings, Jesus was portrayed doing all sorts of magical things when he was a child. There's a story of the young Jesus raising a bird back to life. But the real gospel writers don't seem to have any problem with Jesus living to 30 and not doing any of those miraculous things that we would expect from a purely spiritual God. I think one of the most poignant ways that our scripture stands against the Gnostic heresy is the vision of the prophet Zechariah. And this is found in the last chapter of that book in the Old Testament. He has a vision in which every cooking pot is as sacred as the articles used in the temple for worship. In his vision, even the bells on the horses' harnesses are inscribed with the words, "Holy to the Lord." That's the Christian vision of our world, where the mundane things like cooking pots are just as sacred as the things used in worship. We're not atheists who believe that matter has no meaning. We're not Gnostics who believe that matter is evil and we have to escape from it someday. We're Christians. And because we're Christians, we believe that the things God calls good are good. They matter, and what we do with them matters. So we have a responsibility to manage what God has created, not plunder it. And it's this managing of the world that we call work. And we must see it as part of God's commission to us as people.
So, why do we need a theology of work? First of all, it brings meaning to that portion of your life that occupies most of your waking hours. Your work is central to your life. It's not peripheral. Think of how much time you spend at work, like I'd said earlier. A theology of work is essential for putting work in its place. It's neither one's God, but it's not just a curse. It's critical for understanding the mission of the whole people of God, since the workplace is where most people live, and it's generally not accessible to professional missionaries. Scripture indicates in Revelation 14:13 that the deeds of Christians follow them. There will be work in the new heaven and the new earth. It's not just people sitting on clouds. It's a picture of a city with people coming and going in Revelation. And since work is not merely a transitory or temporary part of our humanity, we need to understand work, and we need to understand our own work in order to be fully human.
So we're going to look at this from 4 angles, and these are all the things that you'll find listed in your packets. We'll start with 5 major doctrines, then move on to 4 commandments, then 4 ways that God works, and finally the 4 M's of marketplace theology. And all of these things are going to overlap and intertwine a lot as we move through this talk. These are really a lot of foundational truths of our faith. They're not things that are just about work. They're about Christian living. But they have a lot to say about work because work is such a big part of our lives as Christians. So the first major doctrine I want to talk about is the doctrine of creation. You can read about this in Genesis 1 and 2, those first 2 chapters describing how God made everything. They describe humans being made in God's image. And there are way too many implications to that for me to go into all of it in this talk. But for right now, for our purposes, we need to know this. Being made in God's image means we are called to represent our God in this world. We are his representatives here on earth. And as we'll talk about a little bit later, our God is a God who is always at work. At creation, humans were given meaningful work to do. To be fruitful and multiply, to fill the earth and subdue it. This work is about growing and expanding human civilization and bringing order to the wildness of nature. Adam's first specific task is to name the animals that God created. And it's so funny to me to imagine him going through this process. All the animals are parading in front of him, and he's reclining there, still nude in the garden. And he's saying, I think you will be kangaroo. How did he come up with these things? But that task that Adam had was creating order. He was ordering the world around him. Now, this language of subduing the earth is sometimes interpreted to mean that we have free reign over everything, that we have the right to use animals, plants, and natural resources however we want to, regardless of the consequences. But that's taking this a step too far. Remember that God made people in his image to be like him. So we have a responsibility to care for the earth as he would, in submission to his purposes. Mandy talked about recycling, and I think that's a small way that we can care for the earth as a reflection of God's image and God's care for the earth. When God made the earth, he looked at it and he said, this is good. So we should treat it like something that God thinks is good and something God delights in. Also, in this creation doctrine, we see that humans are made to be interdependent. In the creation story, God calls a lot of things good. After each thing that he creates, the scripture says he looked at it and said it was good. But there's one thing God says is not good. He says it is not good for man to be alone. So God made humans to be together in relationship. And I think it's beautiful to see things like this where a lot of God's people come together and celebrate relationship. We have fun, we laugh together, we play together, and we also work together. So one of the benefits that we experience as interdependent relational beings is we're able to work together and exchange things of value. Our interconnectedness allows us to do what we call business, and that's a big part of our work too. So the second major doctrine is brokenness and the fall. This comes in Genesis chapter 3. And I really encourage you guys to take some time and read through those first 3 chapters of Genesis and think about them in relation to the things that we're talking about this morning. But I'm going to give you a quick recap of what happens there in chapter 3. God gave Adam and Eve a beautiful garden with lots of delicious fruit to eat. There was only one tree in the whole garden that God said was off limits. There was just one in this whole big garden. But with the temptation of the serpent, Adam and Eve decided to take things into their own hands and eat from that one tree, thinking that it would make them like God. And God responds to them by describing the curse that they've brought down on themselves and their offspring due to their sinful choice. Sometimes we read the curse and think, oh, God is punishing people by doing all of these things to them. But I think many aspects of the curse are just God explaining how the world is going to be now that sin has entered in. These are natural results of people choosing to go their own way and sin against God. So one aspect of the curse is that work becomes a painful burden to people. Work itself is not a result of the fall. Remember, Adam and Eve already had work to do in the garden before this. But under the curse, God says that the work of raising children will become painful, and the work of growing crops will be plagued by thorns and thistles. All of these complications and problems are introduced into human work as a result of sin and the fall. Everything in our world has been impacted by the fall. Nothing is untouched by sin after this situation. So some of our work now is sinful. There are ways that I can purposely expend my energy to harm others or to offend God. And even my good work has become more difficult because of brokenness in the world. So at this point, I want to address a myth that I think all of us have heard. It's this: if you love your job, you'll never work a day in your life. Has anybody heard that? Anybody ever been told that? Find what you love and then you'll never work a day in your life. But that is simply not true. People who believe that are ignoring the reality of sin and the curse. The truth is there's still a lot of good work available to us. And when we have the right mindset, it can give us a sense of joy and purpose. But it's still going to be work. It's still going to be difficult. Even good work demands the sweat of our brow. And you will probably never find a job that is always fun. Even if you did, you would miss out on a lot of character growth that comes from doing challenging things. So please don't buy into that myth. It is false.
So the third doctrine is redemption and transformation and renewal. God is working actively to redeem everything. Revelations 21:5 says, "He who is seated on the throne said, I am making everything new." God is making us new, and he's transforming us as workers. In the workplace, where you go to work and where you spend that time can be a place where spiritual development happens. That's not reserved for just camps like this or church or small group. Your workplace can be an arena of spiritual growth for you. In work, we participate in mitigating the curse. To mitigate means to make something less severe or less painful. We get to work alongside God and making the consequences of the curse less painful for people and repairing a broken world. And we get to participate with God in the work that he's doing in people's lives, in their relationships, in their homes. You can have an impact on people in those areas just through your relationship with them at work. But it's kind of hard sometimes on your part to understand how your tasks at your job are fulfilling any of these commandments. Some careers it's easier, like teachers, or I'm a social worker, and it's really not that hard for me to see, like, oh, I'm helping this person graduate. I'm clearly impacting their life. I'm clearly working to make their life better. But there are a lot of jobs where it's full of tasks that may seem completely meaningless, completely mundane. You're isolated. It's not relational, and it's hard to see what is this job where I sit at a computer doing to repair a broken world. And so I asked Grant Trotter. He spoke last night about the internship. He was the guy that, So I asked him if he would write a little testimonial about how he has found the redemptive value in the work that he does. So I'm going to read that for you guys, okay? So these are the words of Grant Trotter. I work as a web programmer for a small company in Denton that makes educational software. I've been there for almost a year. I went into this job assuming I would be the only Christian and that I would be the most mature and wise employee. Sarcastic tone, please, is what he put, but I don't know if I did it good enough, so I want you to know he's being sarcastic. However, I found that the company was started by a group of exemplary Christians who have taught me more than I ever would have guessed about life, faith, and work. I'm indebted to them for their examples and their mentorship. Who would have thought that an entry-level 26-year-old would have something to learn from his supervisors? I've pondered the spiritual value of my work, and this is how I would state it. Our product helps teachers teach their students. It's specifically designed to help teachers identify struggling students on a daily basis and help them before they fall behind and get discouraged. The benefits of effective education for a person's quality of life are obvious and far-reaching. But I would be lying if I said I feel like going into work most mornings. Being able to state the value of my job doesn't immediately make me humble and earnest in my work ethic. I'm confronted with my laziness, selfishness, and pride every week. Learning how to think, feel, pray, and act in my vocation is still very much a work in progress, but the rubber has met the road. I can sense very clearly that growth is underway. It's one thing to read about someone else learning to do their work as an act of worship. It's much more exciting to sense that I've begun the slow, hard work of cultivating those values in my own spirit by the grace and power of God. And I wanted to share that because in one of our adult small groups at Denton North, we had the assignment to basically create that almost one-sentence statement that explains the value of what you do at your job, because it's a small group. Most of us are in careers. And I remember Grant. I remember being so impacted by how he had seen the redemptive value of a job where he worked on a computer all day, but he was able to see how what he did had a role in changing someone's life and redeeming these students. I mean, they're able to have a better education because of the software that he creates while sitting at a computer. But he had to work to find that. That's not obvious. It wasn't just right there in front of his face how what he was doing was valuable in any way. And that is a perspective shift that a lot of you will have to practice once you get into the workplace, is finding out what is the value of my work? What am I doing that fulfills any of these commandments that God's given me as a disciple? So the fourth doctrine is consummation, talking about the end of this age. So in heaven and in the new, wow, that's weird. In heaven and the new earth, we will be fully human. Like we said, we don't become angels. We will not be sitting on clouds, playing harps with wings on us. That's not the picture you should have. The new heaven and the new earth will include work and enterprise. And it won't be work because we're desperate for some product that we need and there's not enough. It's not work that's driven by that. It's work that's driven by the need for exchange and mutual dependence. That's how God made us. He made us to live in community. It's not good for man to be alone. God made us to work together and to work alongside each other to do good things. And that will include some form of business and marketing, but it will be without the curse and without sin. Can you imagine business being run without anyone being taken advantage of, or without any oppression of vulnerable groups in order to make a profit? So much of the business that we benefit from and the enterprise that we benefit from usually hurts someone else. And that won't be the way work is in heaven. Work will be redeemed in and of itself to be good and without sin. And at the end of Revelation, like I said earlier, it's a city. People are coming and going and working. So it's taken us from a garden to a city where people are involved. The work of people is evident and obvious. Work is good. It's not a curse in and of itself. It is affected by the curse, but it is not the curse. Work is good. And the big question is, will what I do last? Does what I do matter? And I think the Bible says yes. The fifth doctrine is incarnation. God became human. He took on physical form, saying to us through that how I made you is good. Flesh and blood humans are good. And Jesus came as a common laborer. He spent most of his life working and a few years doing full-time ministry. So what does that tell us? That Jesus showed us what it means to be fully human, and a lot of his time was spent working. That tells us that our work is important. Back to Kelly.
Just have to take it off mute. I'm trying to leave it on mute because I'm coughing a little bit up here, and I don't want to burst your eardrums when I do that into the microphone. So you're welcome. So our next angle that we're going to look at to understand our theology of work is 4 really important commandments. I'll be talking about 2 that we call the creation commandments. Now, these 2 are called creation commandments because they date back to the very beginning of our story. God means for these commandments to govern human behavior for all time. These commandments will never expire or be superseded. They apply now for us today, and they'll go with us into our eternal life in the age to come. So the first creation commandment is the cultural mandate. This again comes from Genesis 1. This is verses 26 and 28. When God said, "Be fruitful and multiply, fill the earth and subdue it, and have dominion over it." So I already talked about this under the doctrine of creation, but I want to talk about this specific command. The first work of humans was cultivating a garden. Now, cultivate and culture come from the same Latin word root, cultus, meaning to care for. Thus, God's command to care for and bring order to the earth is called the cultural mandate. Caring for the earth and making the best of it is our first duty to God. It's the first command given to people. So the language of dominion is wrapped up in this command, and it's repeated in the New Testament. Paul says in 1 Timothy that one day we will reign with Christ. Paul says that one day we will judge angels. Now, I don't have the slightest clue what that's really going to look like. That sounds crazy insane to me, that we would be reigning next to Christ judging angels. But this idea that God's people have dominion over all of God's creation started at the very beginning in Genesis. And one day we'll see what that looks like at the end. So we fulfill this cultural mandate when we harness the resources of earth to build human culture and promote human flourishing. When we grow crops, which, like Brandon said, most of us don't actually know how to do. But when we grow our food, we're doing this. When we study bacteria and viruses to try to promote human health, we're doing this. When we get energy out of fossilized algae deposits underground and then drive cars and light our homes, we're doing this. And I think we even do this when we try to understand God's creation, when we study fields like science, when we send telescopes into space to understand his universe. We're doing this. Now, this is work that we share with our fellow human beings. It's not exclusively Christian work. So we also share the intrinsic dignity that comes with it. There's dignity in doing good work. And so we can affirm others when they live out this calling, whether or not they're Christians, whether or not they call Jesus Lord. So if you know somebody who's not a Christian but is working to promote human flourishing and build culture, that's a good thing. Affirm them in that. We're not at war with people who aren't Christians. There's a persistent myth in our culture that calls the work of ministry or mission God's work. And this mandate really debunks that myth. Any good work is God's work. Paul Stevens, I'm quoting him so much, he wrote many, many books on what he calls marketplace theology or biblical thinking about how we work. And so he said this: work is kingdom work when it creates new wealth, when it alleviates poverty, brings well-being to people, embellishes and improves human life, and as it engages powers resistant to God's coming shalom. So the second of these creation commandments is really 2 commandments, so that may be confusing to you guys. But number 2 is the Great Commandments. And you can read these in the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 22. This comes when Jesus is challenged by the teachers of the law, and they ask him, "Teacher, what is the most important commandment?" He says this: "You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, and with all your soul, and with all your mind. This is the greatest and first commandment. And a second is like it: you shall love your neighbor as yourself. On these 2 commandments depend all the law and the prophets." So Jesus repeats these paired commands, but they were already familiar to the Jewish people of his day. They're recorded in the law as it was given to Moses very early on in the Old Testament. But they were operating even before Moses had them written down. They are as old as humanity. Adam and Eve, Cain and Abel, Noah and his sons, they were all held to these commands long before God handed them down on stone tablets. In her talk, Sarah talked about Noah being faithful to God. And it's important to remember there wasn't a codified law system for Noah. Noah just had to listen to God, and these are the commands that God expected him to follow. So we can't justify any work that violates these 2 commands. There's no justification for work that offends God or is unloving to our neighbor. But anytime we do work that is fulfilling these commands, that's part of living out our calling as humans. So Chelsea's going to talk about the redemption commandments.
So the redemption commandments, what we mean by that are, these are the commandments for Christians. They are the commands that focus on our participation in how God is redeeming the world and redeeming humanity. They don't replace the creation commandments, but they build on them. And ultimately, one day, this work, the redemptive work, will be completed, but it's not yet. So the first one is, or I guess it's technically the 3rd commandment, the first redemption commandment, right? It's a little confusing, is the new commandment. And this is from John 13:34 through 35. It says, "A new command I give you, love one another. As I have loved you, so you must love one another. By this, everyone will know that you are my disciples if you love one another." So we're to love each other as Christians, particularly beyond our love for our neighbor. And this is a way that everyone will know that we are God's followers. It's a new community that's a light to the world. It's a big sign that says this is how God's working and this is who he is. And it can't be hidden. It's a city on a hill that can't be hidden. And it may seem like vocational ministry is more conducive for this, right? Because you're around believers all the time. Everything you're doing is kind of focused on talking about these things. And there's a lot of opportunities, it seems, to serve people and bless people. But it's doable in every workplace. I've had a really, really wonderful opportunity to build deep friendships with my coworkers who are also Christians. It's been so special to me, and there's some of the people that I really am closest to now. And it's something that other coworkers have noticed and commented on. They see how we love and support each other. They see us choose to work together rather than compete. It's kind of become a thing, like that we really care about each other. Me and a few of these friends that I'm really close to. So your workplace is a unique environment where you can spend a lot of time around people who are different from you, with different backgrounds, different ideas on Christianity, and you can really impact them through how you love them and how you love others. You can send a message with that. The fourth commandment is the Great Commission, Matthew 28:18 through 20. "Then Jesus came to them and said, 'All authority in heaven and earth has been given to me. Therefore, go and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit, and teaching them to obey everything I have commanded you. And surely I am with you always to the very end of the age.'" So this is a specific part of the cultural mandate. We're not just to cultivate the world, but humanity. Humanity is in chaos, and we are called to work alongside God to bring everything back under his lordship. The workplace can be a mission field. How you work can affect your impact. I'm sorry, I got confused for a second. The workplace can be a mission field, and how you work can impact your effectiveness in fulfilling this command. You can work so you have free time to do other meaningful ministry. You can work so that you can make disciples of your own children. Or you can work so you have free time to be around your children and family members. You can work to support others, to spend time in specialized mission fields. A lot of the people who have graduated from Focus and now have jobs have turned around and support people who are on Focus staff or support people who are interns, apprentices. Something that was really challenging to me when I began working was adjusting these expectations for myself. You know, I had just spent 4 hours in Focus, 4 years. I was like, this is the worst. No, I'm kidding. So I just spent 4 years in Focus, right? I was making disciples. I was studying Focus on Jesus with students, doing on-campus evangelism in a small group, meeting with the peer team leader, meeting with the COFA. And then I got to my workplace. I graduated and transitioned out of that, and none of that was built into my schedule. I was lucky, and I still am lucky to get one-on-one time with like 2 people in a week. And even sometimes I'm like, oh, that's a lot. Like, I'm so tired. But, you know, I really felt like I was failing at fulfilling the Great Commission. I can remember, she may not remember, but I remember sitting with Sarah King, and it was within a few months of graduating, and I was like, I am not a disciple maker anymore. I've quit. Like, I feel like I've quit making disciples. And I am failing at fulfilling the Great Commission. And I had to really learn, God really was so good to me and has taught me how to adjust those expectations. I wasn't going to be given a group of 10 to 12 people interested in Jesus, interested in community, in a similar place of life with a similar schedule. But I've really grown to love my coworkers. I've grown to see them as people who deserve to be loved and served and treated well, and who deserve to know about Jesus. I began saying yes anytime a coworker invited me to be a part of their life, no matter what it was. I ended up spending a weekend in Waco to go to Baylor homecoming football game, which, if you know me, like, last place I'd ever end up. I was telling someone, like, if I ever went missing, it would legitimately be months where someone was like, maybe she's at a Baylor football game. Like, no one would ever think that. But my coworker was like, do you want to go with me and spend the weekend with my parents and go to a bonfire? And I was like, okay, yeah. I have so many football games, which is weird. I guess God's trying to tell me, like, care about sports more. But ended up at so many football games because people have invited me. Or that, like, asked if I'd go run this, like, race with them. I don't know. It's literally bizarre. But amazing things will happen if you just, like, say yes to the Spirit. Like, yep, I'll go to this thing I would rather die than to go to. But I love you. And, like, me and that friend's mom text each other now. I met her once, and she'll text me still. And I call her Sousaphone. Her name's Susan. Isn't that a good nickname? So I love my coworkers. I've been able to really love them and ask them about their life, and I pray with them. I ask them about their kids and their marriages, and we laugh together and we support each other. And my work has become a really neat community for me, and that is a total God deal. I'm getting emotional because I truly did not ever think that would happen again. When I left Focus, I thought that I had left community. And that's not true, you guys. Work is a spiritual place. And God can build very good relationships there. And many of my coworkers who aren't Christian have learned that they can trust me. I'm not bragging on myself. Please know that, okay? This is all God. But they've learned that they can trust me and they can come to me with tough questions because they know I care and I'll listen. They can say, I just went to this weird volunteer meeting and they were all Christians and they said all this weird stuff. What do you think? And now I have to, like, speak for these random Christians I've never met. But I am like, okay, well, maybe it was because of this. And I get to teach people about community. I don't know. That's kind of a tangent. But it's taken me a long time, 4 years, to really build that. But once I changed my expectations for what it looked like to fulfill the Great Commission with where I was in life, it became a lot less stressful and a lot more of a blessing to me. And I will say, I have to credit, most of those skills came from Focus. Even if you leave Focus and you go into the workplace, you're building a foundation for yourself right now to help you make disciples wherever you are. You are learning skills to talk to people and to ask them, how are you doing? And to really mean, like, how are you doing? Do you want to talk about anything? How's your marriage? You know, the questions that you're learning to ask people during Welcome Week are the questions you're going to ask people at work. They're the questions you're going to ask people at a staff meeting. Like, it's all the same, right? Except not your major. Don't ask them what their major is. Because they're, like, old at this point. So anyways, I want to recap this section before we're about to take a break. But I want to recap with touching back on this myth that Kelly talked about, that church work is God's work. Or that it's God's only work here in the world. That is simply not true. And we listened to an audio to prepare for this. I think it's Paul Stevens, right? I don't know. I can't remember. But he basically kind of, like, had this anecdote of, like, when people say, I'm leaving my career to go do God's work. And he's like, what were you doing before? Like, you should have been doing God's work already. That never should have stopped being your ultimate mission. And that should give you guys a sense of peace when you're making these job decisions. I hear a lot of college students just agonize over not feeling like they've gotten a clear calling to a certain job. I don't know what I'm called to do. But you're called to make disciples. You're called to love people and to bless them, and that can be done anywhere on this planet, in any job. That's what you're called to do. And that should give you a sense of peace. There's no place you can go where God's not working. Where God hasn't said, I love the people there and I want to know them and I want them to know me. So you have that opportunity to work alongside God no matter where you are. We have tons of options to join him, so don't stress out about picking the right career. It's all going to be good, right? Some of it may be harder than others, but it's all going to be good. So we're going to take a break. We're going to give you guys 5 minutes. Okay, whoa, sassy. All of you just gave me attitude. That was Kelly's idea, by the way.
Hey.
I was like, let's give them an hour. I'm just kidding.
We have a talk to finish after you come back.
So really go fast, go to the bathroom, get some food.
Get up and stretch because I see some of y'all sleeping.
And then come back.